Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Self-Reg Show. I am super excited to be here today with Claudio Moschella. Welcome, Claudio.
Well, thanks for having me, Susan. I'm always excited to be here and sharing.
Well, and I was commenting on your beautiful background. You're working from home today. We're recording this right at the end of June, and Claudio is a principal, but a longtime self-regger. And I'm just wondering, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, Claudio?
I'm a elementary school principal. I've actually was in the Peel District School Board for 20 years, and I recently made a switch over to the Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board. I've been there about 9 months, so the switch was really stressful in terms of unlearning old ways and learning new ways, kind of thing. So, but I've enjoyed the changeover, and my goal is to now try and slowly spread self-reg in the Dufferin Peel Catholic School Board. That is my goal. I also have two younger daughters, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and my lovely wife, who is an intuitive self-regger. I mean, she hasn't taken the courses, but she just knows it. She's so good.
Well, and I always get the feeling she's very patient.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, it's interesting. I'm not sure how many years ago I met you, but I can still recall. I actually can see the place you were sitting at our Self-Reg Summer Symposium. You were in the audience, and you came with a group of administrators or up and coming
Yes, that's right.
administrators,
Yeah.
I think, right? And I can still see where you were sitting. We're just coming up on our 10th annual. Right around the time this will be released, so at Trent University. But I can see you sitting there, and I remember you made many connections and you got to know a whole lot of people, but it was one of those things when you meet somebody and you feel like the penny dropped. I can still remember you afterwards coming up and talking to Stuart and kind of, needing more and more and more. Do you
Oh, I
remember?
couldn't get enough. I just couldn't get enough. I remember when I was taking when I read the book, when I read Calm Alert Learning, and at the end of it, there's courses. I'm like, oh, there's courses? And I was so hooked after reading the book over the summer of 2016. And then I took the course, and after the course, I remember saying to my wife, "Hon, I'd love to be a facilitator. Like, I just can't
Yes.
get enough of this." And then 3 months later, Paula emails me, "Claudia, we're looking for more facilitators." I said, "Oh my goodness." So, and it never
Well,
looked back.
and so, all of you listening, if you want more of Claudio, come take a course because he is definitely one of our facilitators. So, we are talking about a really cool topic today, and it was your idea. You wanted to explore how to use self-reg in the area of conflict resolution. Where did that idea come from in the first place, Claudio?
So I guess over the years of learning self-reg and being an administrator, I've come to realize how stress is involved in creating conflict between students. And I've come to realize with those 5 steps of Shanker, that you really got to figure out how to reduce the stress that created the conflict. And I've learned sometimes the stress goes back 4 or 5 years for some of these students. And so I recall, problem solving with kids, let's say in grade 6. I'm like, tell me, when was the first time you just never trusted that person anymore? Well, Mr. Muscella, in grade 2, I remember, I'm like, whoa, I'm like, that's that red brain now firing every time they see that child, and they just see them in a negative light or as a stressor. And I realized, okay, problem solving has to also do with stress response, and in the course they talk about canalization. Behaviors become kind of canalized and permanent with a child, and having to undo that. And so oftentimes when we do conflict resolution, I think about, I teach the kids, you got to reframe that child's behavior. Maybe they're having a bad day, so they can see him with softer eyes rather than red brain type eyes. And then we talk about, okay, how do I need to reduce this child's stress, right? And oftentimes I'll separate students, because what I've also learned through self-reg is, prior to self-reg, I'd put kids in the same room and say, let's sort this out.
Yeah.
Impossible. Impossible, now that I realize a child can't be honest and vulnerable when their threat is sitting right beside them and it's firing their red brain. It might not look like it, but they're sitting there and their red brain's firing off saying, oh my goodness, I hate you so much for what you did to me. So I've learned through self-reg, if you're going to resolve conflicts, you can't do it in the same room. They have to be in separate rooms. I'd oftentimes go back and forth between 2 rooms. Okay, they said this. And then I go back to the other room. Okay, they said this. And what I'm doing there is kind of reducing their stress and making them realize, okay, this is what they said. And they'll say to Mr. Muscella, ask them this question. I want to know what they have to say. I said, okay. So I go back and forth. But that's the whole process of reducing the stress and kind of trying to restore that relationship between the two of them.
Well, and it's interesting as you talk about putting everybody in the same room, okay, figure it out and then come and tell us what you figured out. There's the stress of being with the person that you've had the conflict with in the first place. But there's always also the stress of trying to please you or not get in trouble or not get the
That's
phone calls
right.
home or all the peers know you're in there. Like, and that
Oh,
can
that's
do different things at grade 2 than it does in grade 10, right? So
right.
for those listening that not everybody's an educator and that maybe are wondering about conflict resolution just in general, what would you want to tell somebody about what, what falls under sort of that umbrella of conflict resolution in schools? So forget self-reg. What,
Okay. So,
we're
so
talking
what?
about resolution for
Oh, it's
decades.
hard to forget self-reg though, Susan, to be honest with you, when I think about conflict resolution.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when it comes to when I'm trying to resolve conflicts between students, I've come to realize both have their perceptions of what happened. Right. There really is the truth is really fuzzy because they'll say, no, you lied to me. And they're like, no, I didn't. And it's like they keep arguing back and forth. So I think number one, in conflict resolution, you have to honor what their story is in that situation and what they understand it. And sometimes it's tied to an event that may have happened months ago or weeks ago or the prior day. But I always find that conflict resolution, you have to honor the individual's feelings. And again, you say don't go to self-reg, but I often empathize with their red brain, so I try and get them back online. So they'll say what happened and I'll have to empathize. Yes, I'd be upset if I were you if that happened to me. And yeah, and I'd be doing it to both students before I can bring them together. But conflict resolution, you can't bring students together until they're calm enough to be able to speak about it, until their blue brains are back online. Right. To me, conflict resolution can happen when students are calm enough to articulate what's upsetting them, when they're back to being rational. Right. And you have to know that. And oftentimes we don't have enough time for that. Like teachers don't have enough time to say there's two kids that come up to them and they're upset about something and they're in the hallway while the rest of the class is in the classroom. And I've told staff, I said, you can't, once kids are heated, you can't solve the problem. You're going to have to call for support. But what that does is tire me out because,
Yeah.
you know, so this is why we have to have proactive measures to avoid the conflict resolution, right?
So one of the things that this reminds me of is like the conflict resolution approaches in the schools I've worked, both as teacher and administrator and inclusion, but also many of the ones I visit. So often what I've seen is, people talk about it. There's often a form or a process. There's like packages, there's actual books and
Oh,
on how to do this. And
mhm,
it's usually okay, we need to fill this out.
mhm.
Um, and the missing piece, and then people are like, well, and we finish it, everybody fills out the form and we agree, and then nothing changes. Like that's the biggest thing, right? And so people keep doing it. It's that sort of that idea of definition of insanity, doing the same thing
So,
over and over again, and it's repeat and right back to our form. And it's a big one. Why, like in self-reg, it is not a program.
so just to jump in, Susan, you
Yeah,
reminded me, I actually did away with those reflection forms.
yeah,
So
yeah,
when I was first a vice principal, we'd all fill out the problem, answer the questions, document, document, document. But at some point, I said, enough of this. The
yeah.
documentation is creating more stress in the situation. And I would hear, and this was actually right before I started learning about self-reg. I started catching on. I'm like, these forms are causing me more problems and the kids more problems. And then once I learned self-reg, that's it. Kids don't fill out anything anymore because some of them struggle to even hold a pencil. It's now just put thought onto paper. So I scribe everything. So I'm like, tell me what happened, and I make notes. And they just speak, and that's less stressful for them to share their story.
So, if anyone out there is listening and does conflict resolution, just take a moment and pause and think about what is your goal in resolving the conflict. Sometimes we go through the motion of stuff. We might
Exactly.
care and we might think we want to resolve it, but what's your actual goal? And then I'm going to ask you, Claudia, what's your goal? Because I actually think some of us think we're working on, while we're trying to resolve the conflict, we're
Mhm.
trying to get everybody to make amends, right? I'm curious, what's your goal when you go in to resolve a conflict? You got two students that are really having a hard time. It's over and over again.
So my
What?
goal is always not to allow the students to leave the room without seeing each other, where it fires off their red brain, where it sets off their fight or flight, where they don't have to stare at the other person to know where they are in the room. And that was another interesting one I learned in self-reg. Kids would always be like, he keeps staring at me. He's always trying to quote unquote punk me off with his stares. And I actually teach him, I said, no, 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 hold on. I said, actually, the brain can't help itself. It
Yeah.
needs to know where the threat is in the classroom. That's why they keep staring at you. That means we still have a problem. So oftentimes I just make sure that the kids are smiling and laughing in each other's presence where they don't see there's a threat anymore in each other. Now, there's behaviors that need to be consequenced. And by the time they're calm, I can issue those consequences and they'll take them without fear of anything, right? They know they've made a mistake, they're remorseful. And so the goal is always to make sure the kids leave the office or the situation where they don't see each other as a threat anymore, because then they can coexist again. Now, in calling parents, I say, listen, we've solved it today, but something might happen next week. You need to know this, but we'll solve it again. And what I've learned is the gaps between conflicts grow bigger and bigger when we do it this way, when we really unpack what are the stressors in this particular conflict so they can rationalize, and the narrative changes in their mind about that particular student. So sometimes I have a conflict every day, I deal with it every day, and then the following week it's just once, and then it's once in 3 weeks, then it's once in a month. And that's why when people talk about bullying, I'm like, if we get to the root cause of it and turn off the alarm bells in their head, you know the bullying kind of subsides. Now, that child's behavior might not be directed at that particular student anymore. It could move on to another student. But that's because they just need the continued support to get to that calm mindset, right? But I've seen it where, they'll pick on someone, we resolve it, they move on to someone else. That just tells me they really need more support.
Yeah, I love that, and I have to give a plug for our new bullying course. It's about reframing bullying, and it really is looking at the roots because we want to do something about it, right? So you mentioned, I'm going to get to an example because we want to make sure that everybody can hear a nice concrete example. But
Mhm.
you said something kind of, I think that's really important. You said, okay, teachers are maxed. Yeah, and fair enough, right? And everybody can't sit down and have,
Mhm.
go back and forth to rooms. And so you reach out to admin for help for sure. And that's nice that your team feels safe to do that. That there's no judgment in that. That's how we work as a team. But you use the word preventative. Tell me what you mean by that. So
So
exactly
so
what you said.
so my wife is also an educator, and she is so good at this. But we often, for years we talked about one particular way is so good. It's just community circles,
Yeah,
classroom discussions, giving students an opportunity to speak. Because oftentimes, kids come to me and they seek me out because we have the opportunity to just talk and,
yeah,
and sort things out. And I find that's really therapeutic for anybody. And one preventative measure that I would tell all educators: have community meetings with your students. Teach them reframing just in community circles. Like, talk about situations to say, what would you do in that situation? How would that make you feel? Why do you think that person acted that way? And why now? Right? Our step one. But I think just that, a community circle, 15, 20 minutes to start the day, gives kids an opportunity to speak. I mean, there's other activities that are done in the classroom, but if you want just one simple one, a community circle with your classroom. Now, it's interesting. Don't do this in the spring, because what you'll get is a 2.5 hour community circle. And
yeah,
I've learned that the first time I was learning about using that tool, I did it, and I think it was May, and the kids just couldn't stop talking. They were so frustrated and angry about things, and they spoke for 2.5 hours. Had a great day the rest of the day, but
yeah.
then I know educators, they start in September, and their class in March is like, just it's harmonious, it's amazing. And I've told staff that I said, put the work in now. You'll know by March, you'll see a huge turn in certain students, and those last 3-4 months are glorious when they're calm and you put in all the work at the beginning. But I think that's just one particular strategy: community circles. And even we've created resources where we have questions in the community circle, like personalize the question, apply the question to someone else, and then make it like a global type question. So if you're talking about, we'd have the topic of snitching. So
Yeah.
we talk about snitching, and the kids would have a community circle about it, 15, 20 minutes. And it was great. And so I think that's one preventative measure, is getting the kids the opportunity to speak.
And when you do your community circles, does everybody have to speak, or is it more of a conversation?
No, so we always have a talking stick or a talking item, and they get to pass it. They want to pass, but I think some of the in the community circle we adopted. It was formerly called tribes, and
Yeah, yeah, it's
it's
fabulous. Yeah,
yes, it's escaping me the new name that they dubbed their classroom meetings. But their four agreements are fabulous. I think that the right to pass, uh, mutual respect, no put downs, and then appreciation, which I love. At the end, you give the kids a chance to appreciate something they heard,
yeah.
because I tell students, I said, if you're in an appreciation mode, you're not in an angry mode. I said anger and appreciation can't coexist. I said, so if we can focus on appreciating things, then we stay in our blue brain kind of thing.
One of the added ones that, because I worked with, I enjoyed the tribes had all kinds of great, I forget, I don't know what the new version is, but it had all kinds of great resources and ideas too. But another one that I learned from the indigenous communities where I worked was validating, repeating somebody else's idea and taking away this idea that was stealing somebody else's idea, or that was being, no, that's actually validating. And when you do it, you
Exactly.
make it safe for people to contribute. And I always found that making passing absolutely fine, and then you would find people eventually, people will start to speak up over time. So, and the other one that I'm going to add, so that's sort of an organized one, but valuing those every single moment. Like, I know you hear your date name 5,000 times a day, but the children you're having the biggest challenges with, those micro moments of connection, right? Can make
Oh,
it, especially when, and they're screwing up, they've done stuff, that they don't feel good about. It's the dignity. So
absolutely.
help
So
somebody out.
when I came into my new school in October, the one thing after 2 weeks of being there, I put in a rule. I said no cell phones allowed in the classroom. They're either in your school bag or I take them in the office. And of course, being new principal, nobody liked that. The grade eights and grade sevens were just furious. And actually, someone after I had an assembly, so I had an assembly after 2 weeks. Just to give them an idea of what I was all about. And of course, I put the blue brain up there and I put the triune brain and I talked to the kids about, especially the intermediate kids, I empathize with them, the stress they're under, right? Despite having very firm and strict expectations on certain things. And after a couple of weeks, a staff member came up to me and said, Claudio, you know what? I overheard a student saying, I'm not sure if I like this principal or not yet. I have to give it time. But, that was them. But at the same time, like you said,
Yeah.
as much as I'm firm and strict with students, I go around and talk to them, like, so, because I know that I can't be in their red brain. I
Yeah.
have rules in place that might fire off the red brain, but then I kind of buffer it at recess, and I'll go play soccer, or I'll purchase some equipment and say, here, we need some recess equipment. I'll ask them how their weekend is, how you doing, some humor sometimes with the students, and so it's a balance, right? Like, and so I've had students now. I've been there for 8, 9 months, and they're saying, Mr. Moschella, like just yesterday, they're like, you're so strict sometimes. Like, I like you, but you're strict.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm okay with that. I'm not mean. There's a difference. Strict and mean are completely different. But that
Yeah.
works because I'm out and about, I'm connecting with the kids.
And I think you can say no, like you can say no with love, right? Whether you use that word or not. So
Exactly.
I'm going to invite you back, and I'm going to invite a couple of different people on to have a talk about cell phones. You asked me about my position
Yeah,
on this last year. And for those of you that are screaming as you're listening to the podcast now about all the benefits of digital, and definitely for certain populations and things, I have a master's in educational technology. I believe in it, but you cannot deny the science that's coming out. Jean Twenge, for example, read her, and how these, I support what you just did. So if anybody's
yeah,
yelling, and I do understand there's another side to it, and and how it can be wonderful, rich learning and things, but it's hijacking the attention and the focus and
absolutely.
relationships, and especially in the younger years. So, all right, bring us an example. So everybody out there
Okay.
is like, okay, and they're getting little bits of it already. Tell me a story of how you use this.
So just to before I get into the story, I want viewers to understand that when I'm approaching conflicts, it really doesn't stop with the two students. As soon as I find out there's bystanders, I also bring them into, because oftentimes the bystanders are the stressors, right? They're talking about the story. They don't know the true narrative. So the narrative kind of blows out of proportion. It comes back to the two students that are in conflict and it blows it right back up. So I always keep that in mind as stressors. So I'm gonna give you so I'll give you a couple of examples that I can think of. So I remember there was a conflict between two students, like a physical altercation in the classroom. And so I bring them
Mhm.
down into the office, and the first thing is they need to be suspended. Okay, so let's hold off there. Like, yes, we'll get to the consequences. So of course I'm speaking to both students, and I'm trying to understand what stressors led them to get to the point where they were in such a fight or flight that they were fighting in the classroom. And this had started, this particular incident, 2 weeks prior. So it took time for it to brew. And I kind of share that with staff. I'm like, this is why we need to always be in touch with our class to understand, do you see any limbic resonance cues going on where they seem agitated with each other? Are there comments being made that are underhanded between each other? Anyways, so we unravel with these two particular students, we unravel what the stressors are, and I bring them back together. Whenever I bring students back together, I then share the story that they both have agreed on. So where they went wrong, where the other person went wrong. And these are two students, one of them particularly has been very standoffish, will not admit to anything they did wrong. Never. And so I finally bring them back together and I said, okay, this is what you did. This is what you did. This is how we ended up getting here. Some of the problem is people are bystanders, and you agree to that. And by the end of it, they look at each other, and I don't even say anything. They're like, I'm sorry. Like, they apologize to each other. And here's the other thing. When you can get that to that point, and now you have to call home to tell the parents, this is what happened. And you could tell parents, because the biggest stress for parents is knowing that their kid could be targeted again. That's
Right.
just too stressful for parents. And this is why they get agitated. And when I can tell parents, listen, this is what happened, it's unfortunate, but we figured out why it started, and they actually apologized to each other without me even asking them. That just drops the parent stress, and their voice and tone on the phone is like, thank you, Mr. Moschella. I appreciate it. I'll talk to my child about what they did. And I said, yes. I said, don't punish them. I'm going to give them a consequence. I said, you talk to them. Unless you want to give a consequence, then I won't, right? I always tell parents, no, never double jeopardy. A kid shouldn't be consequenced at home and then consequenced again at school. It's just not fair to them. So that was an incident that happened in the school. I mean, there was a consequence for the students, but it was beautiful to know that even that heated moment that they were able to apologize after each other and no issues after that. And then the
Wow.
next step was for me to go to the classrooms. So then I'd go to the classrooms that they were involved in and said, here's what happened. And I would tell them what happened because I don't want them to change the narrative and cause more conflict. So that's a big piece as well, is making sure that the bystanders understand what's going on because they are part of the stressor as well. That social stress of what are kids talking about, what are they thinking about. And so I'll give you another example that was really a first in my career that I was like, oh my goodness, in the moment, thank goodness I had my faith, my Catholic faith, as well as Stuart Shanker's work to put them together. But we were having an assembly, and a student who was very angry, unknowing to anybody, was very angry with someone else. It was their turn to read on the microphone. Well, they went on the microphone. Not only did they read their part, but they called out a student in the crowd, swore at them. I have parents in the audience. I have kindergartens, grade 1, 2, all hearing this, and I'm sitting there because I know all eyes are on me. In the moment, I realize it needs to be reframed. I need the audience to reframe what they just saw. Like right away, I'm thinking step one, because reframing, you know, being in the Catholic board, I connected to forgiveness, right? We're always trying to teach forgiveness. Reframing is forgiving their behavior because there's another stress behind it. So obviously, I walk up to the student very quietly and I said, you need to come with me. Let's go. And she's like, no, I'm not coming. And I said, I'm here to help you. I could see that you're angry and I'm going to help you. And just those comments, she followed me out to the gym. Then I went back on the mic and I said, everybody, I'm sure what you saw was really upsetting to you. I said, but someone is hurting on the inside. For someone to behave like that on the microphone, they are hurting on the inside. They need our love, not our anger towards them. And I kind of addressed the audience and like that. I said, we are going to help everybody here and solve the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, we're going to solve it, and everything's going to be okay. Let's continue with the assembly. because and then I put in the religious piece. I said, what's God all about? God is love, and and I use that piece as well to help with the reframing. So we had the assembly. After the assembly, I spoke to the two students involved, the one that called out the other student, because the student in the audience is mortified. He's like, I said, how are you feeling? He's like, Mr. Moschella, I'm so embarrassed. Like, everybody's going to be talking about me. I didn't do anything to this person, and this is what they said about me. And I'm like, okay, that's stressful. So again, separate the students, sort it out, figure out what led to this event, figured out what was stressing them out, what was bothering them, and then sharing the answers with each other, right? Again, I'd go back and forth between the two rooms and share the answers. And it was such a beautiful moment that when I finally got to the root of it for both of them, the student who did the swearing and called out the other student, as she left the office, she stopped by the other students who was in another room and said, just said, I'm really sorry for doing that. It was just so nice. Now, I have a whole school who saw this. So
Yeah.
I spoke to the teachers and I said, who do you think it registered with? And the kindergarten, the kindergarten
Yeah.
teachers, well, Claudio asked how the kids thought the assembly went. And they said, it was an amazing assembly. So I didn't need to speak to the kindergartens. I didn't need to speak to the grade ones or twos, but I started from grade 3 and up. And so the following day, I went to each class and I explained to them, what were your feelings about what you saw? And they said, "Oh, I didn't like it, Mr. Moschella. It bothered me. It made me sad." And I actually asked them. I said, "How did you like the way I spoke to the audience and how I dealt with it?" And all the kids, none of them said, "Mr. Moschella, you should punish that person." None of them said that. They all said, "Mr. Moschella, we liked how you spoke to the students. We liked how you treated it. It was with compassion, right?"
Yeah.
It was reframing. Reframing is compassion, right? And so they all said we liked it from grade 3 all the way to grade 8 because I wanted to know, I wanted to take the temperature on where are they in their mindset. Because as we get to adulthood, we just feel like everybody should be punished and consequenced. The empathy is sometimes lost in us, and so I went to every classroom. I talked to them. I asked them about what their feelings. I shared what the narrative was. I shared how, things, communication, there was a breakdown in communication and one got angry with the other and it wasn't deserved. And they have forgiven each other. They're not mad at each other. And so that was the story. I went from class to class to class. And of course, I called the parents of the two students and and I told them what I was going to do, like very transparent in trying to reduce the stress of everybody because that is a stressful moment and control the narrative of what happened. And so the next day, the student actually I waited a couple of days and I went up to the victim. I said, "Is anybody talking to you about it?" He's like, "Nobody, Mr. Muscala." I said, "Nobody's made a comment to you about it?" He's like, "Not one person." And so I waited a month and I said to the student, "Has anybody talked about that one time in the gym?" He's like, "Nobody, Mr. Muscala." So to me, understanding stressors and how to use the 5 steps to reduce the stressors, not just between the students, but the parents, but the bystanders, the audience. And it just like this was a significant event. I've never had this in my life. And it
Yeah.
was dead in the water the very next day. So just the power of understanding stress and how to reduce it and controlling that narrative to make sure you can, restore relationships. And if I didn't have Self-Reg, and I would say a bit of my faith as well, the two of them combine beautifully to resolve this situation because I see the parallels between the two. But if I didn't have Self-Reg, I don't know how I would have handled the situation. Even staff said, Claudia, the way you address the audience, uh, they're like we were just blown away and they're like welcome to the school even though I think it was 3 months into being at this school, right? But again, what modeling for the students, someone did something so egregious that we don't have to hate them, right? We don't have to compound the stress for that particular person.
So
So
I absolutely love this story, and I'm sure that people are getting goosebumps as they listen to it. The one thing that I want to really emphasize, so any of you that are out there saying, "Yeah, but I don't have time," and how many hours of the day, the actual changes that we are all seeking, like we're playing that upstream, that long game. We need to change
exactly.
school culture. You didn't just resolve a problem; you taught a whole school full of
Mhm.
educators and students that they'll be treated with dignity and compassion, no matter what happens,
Mhm.
that can arrive at forgiveness, that you care, and you care about absolutely everybody. These have ripple effects that change school culture. So when you hear Claudio saying things like start in September and it's going to change everything by March, you're not saying there's not going to still be problems.
No,
You're saying
no.
it's like that drip 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 effect that Jean Clinton talks about, or
Mhm.
laying the layers. If you actually look in, like, it's co-regulation, as well. But if you actually look at it, it's over and over and over again that it begins to take hold. And we have a different way of relating to one another because you put the time in. Like, you might think, well, you don't have time. Yeah, if you weren't doing that sort of approach, instead you were office punishment,
Move on.
timeout, stickers, you're la, 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 la,
Yeah.
you're putting more time in. It's actually really investing in what matters, but it's walking our talk in the things that sometimes have a pet peeve. And I know it's not everyone, but we have these posters all over school walls that leadership, and and then we're not walking our talk, or we're yelling at children and saying, you
Mhm.
need to know, right, you
Yeah.
need to not do this or whatever. And it's our stress too, right? We as adults get stressed. But when you, like, at leadership, teachers can do this sort of approach as well in their own classrooms. If you're an early childhood educator, you can do that there can be
Mhm.
Sonia Mastrangelo. This sounds like something she would do in a post-secondary. I could see her from Lakehead. I could see
Mhm.
her having sort of a similar approach, right? So I'm blown away. I love that you've chosen this topic, and I'm going to just open it for any final words or final bits of advice or anything that you'd like to leave people thinking about.
Yeah, I just, when it comes to conflict, even like even sometimes as educators, we get frustrated, right? We repeat the same thing over and over again with students. They don't listen, and then we kind of almost flip our lid, right? And we
Yeah.
might raise our voice. And I just tell people, like, understanding the science of self-reg. Just the other day, I had raised my voice to a group of students, or two students, because it's like get into class, like three times, and then I was like, get into class, and I raised my voice, and the next day I knew that I had to make sure I kind of brought that blue brain back in. Right. And I made the effort to go up to the students, because I know, like, when we get upset with students, they think now we hate them. And you
Mhm.
have to be mindful of that, even as an educator, that you always go back to them and you restore that. You reduce the stress by giving them a smile or even acknowledging it. And the next day I saw the two students. I said, listen, Mr. Moschella still has love for you. I said, but if you're going to not listen to me, that's what's going to happen. I said, I don't like doing that. I still have love for you. And then, you get the snicker smile, and they appreciate that. And that just takes that off. So I just want to know, it's a stressful time to be an educator for sure, but don't lose sight of the fact that, if that happens where you flip your lid, always just go back and reduce that stress. Kids are far more forgiving than adults. I'll tell you that much. And they're wonderful at it. But yeah, that's basically it. And I've always shared with staff and parents is I have a step, and I take a bit of Stuart Shanker's work, and Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson's work, that I have kind of like a four-step method of when kids come home upset and their parents don't have all the details. I always say to them, your first job is to empathize with your child's behavior. Don't make them feel alone in their emotions, kind of
Mhm.
red brain to red brain, until they're calm enough that they're in their blue brain. Just let them know, oh, I would be upset with that too. And then, the next step is like, reframing. Why do you think that student did that to you? Why do you think they're upset? Because now we're trying to teach kids how to reframe. And I want parents to teach their kids how to reframe. And then the third step is always like, what's our plan? Now that the blue brain is online, what's your plan if someone does that to you again? What do you think you'll do? Because now you got them thinking. And the fourth step is always the last one. Call the school so I can calm you down. Because I know as a parent, you're upset. So these are just
And
things. Maybe that can be another topic of how do we support students with self-reg. That's a segue, Susan. That's a segue.
Well, I have to say that it so sounds like the five look fors of a self-reg haven, but which I will leave for another day.
Yeah.
But the very fact that you ask, "What's your plan?" when we're trying to figure out how to should trust, how to show that we actually trust, and we're like, "Well, I can't because they're
Yeah.
dangerous, or they're going to." Yes, you can. What's
Yeah.
your plan is actually shows trust and genuine trust, right? So I love this. We have to have another day, so now we have two topics.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you very much, Claudio.
All right.
You've given us a lot to think about.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
Okay.
Bye bye.